Hello, my name is Edmund Cannon of the University of Bristol and the Economics Network, and this is a contribution to the symposium giving you ideas for how to produce lectures and teaching material with PowerPoint. So this is about asynchronous teaching, really, producing material that students will be able to use in their own time. I'm going to concentrate on using the features of PowerPoint. And because I'm thinking of this as being for econometricians or economists, I'm going to talk about mathematical formulae and derivations and introducing other material or software. I shall say a little bit about some of the technical issues to make the lectures look, if not professional, at least not completely amateur. I want to emphasise that PowerPoint has lots of features, and therefore there may well be features that I have missed. So the most important thing that economists and econometricians will ask about is how to introduce mathematical formulae. So in PowerPoint, it is relatively straightforward to do this. One can use the Microsoft equation editor, which is a common across Word, PowerPoint, and Outlook, or one could use an add-in such as MathType. The other good thing about PowerPoint is that one can include and edit videos, which means that if one wants to, one can film mathematical formula being written on paper. And at the end, one can record it so that the students can watch it with your voice over the top. So here are some typical mathematical formula that can be typed in. This is the sort of thing that sometimes students see in lectures. The problem with this is that they see all of the students see all of the formulae at the same time, and that can be overwhelming because the students don't see how one formula leads to another. These formulae were produced using the Microsoft equation editor, and that itself can be a little bit fiddly to use. If you're used to using LaTeX or typing in something like that, you just need to be careful to get Microsoft equation editor to work. For example, when typing in some of these formulae, depending on which parts of the formulae are highlighted grey, if I were then to add the epsilon I, it would appear in different places. Here it appears within the summation sign. Here there is a gap so that it appears outside the summation sign. And if I were to type it at the end here, then Microsoft PowerPoint would think that I was making this online and the whole formula would shift across to the left. So one's got to look at where the grey boxes are to see where one's going to enter. And if you're used to using MathType, the confusing thing is that Microsoft equation editor's conventions are slightly different. Once one has the formula how one wants them to look, then one can improve on things by using builds. So the previous slide could start like this, with some text. Then there would be the first equation, then the second, and then the third. And students might find that easier because the equations are appearing sequentially, not all in one go. However, the feedback that I have had and many staff have had is that students don't like seeing equations of that length appearing suddenly from nowhere. If you are going to use builds, and you can do this with both formulae and diagrams, there are complicated ways in which you can link various things together using the animation pane. So one has to choose animations. It's helpful to have the animation pane open, and then here I've highlighted on the third item, and one can change how that enters its order. One can drag the things up and down. However, one of the recommended ways to deal with mathematical formula is to write them on the screen. So I would have to say something like beta hat is equal to the ratio of the sum of yi minus y bar multiplied by xi minus x bar. This is from I equals 1 to n. And then in the denominator, I should have xi minus x bar squared. The advantage of this is that the student hears the words at exactly the same time as the formulae appear on the screen. They see me writing the stuff down, and that helps them when they write down the formulae themselves. Of course, it takes more time, but because the students are able to go backwards and forwards in the video themselves, it's not important to repeat things so often. So perhaps overall the lecture won't be much longer. Now you may be asking, how did Edmund write on the screen? So I'm fortunate that I have a laptop which has a tablet facility and can actually be folded in half as shown. I have a complicated pen which requires 3 batteries to work, 2 watch batteries and 1 AA battery. In my experience, the AA battery goes flat rather quickly. Even if one's not using the pen, it seems to be using energy. And so far as I can make out, it's difficult to buy rechargeable AA batteries without buying a new expensive charger. But one way to write on the screen is to have a complicated piece and expensive piece of kit like the laptop that I have. Alternatively, you can have a simpler laptop, but you could use a tablet, connect the tablet to the laptop. But this is going to involve some sort of technology. Of course, if one has a stylus, it allows one to do lots of other things. For example, I could have a diagram here, which is some sort of supply curve, which I seem to be estimating. And then I can discuss with students the interpretation of the line. For example, I could note that B1 is, in this notation, equal to the intercept with the vertical axis, and I could note that B2 is equal to the slope of the line. Again, the students would see things appearing on the screen at the same time as I'm speaking and at the same speed as they would be writing them down. There are alternative ways to enter mathematics, and one way that you might wish to consider if you want to see the students, to see you writing mathematics, is to embed a video. Here is an example. Consider the matrix X, the inverse of x prime x multiplied by x prime. What happens if we multiply this matrix by itself? Well, let's write it down again. X, the inverse of x prime x multiplied by x prime. The x prime x in the middle cancels with the x prime x inverse. I produced that video using a rather old-fashioned, rather old video camera. It's about 5 or 6 years old, and I had it connected to a tripod which was positioned to look down on the page so that there was minimal wobble. There are various other ways that one could attach a camera, and you may well have a better camera than me on your iPhone or something like that. That is to show you one way that one can get students to see maths being written out with the text read out over the top using cheap and possibly readily available equipment. I filmed the video separately, and then there's an issue about how to embed a video. So when you embed a video, one of the nice things about PowerPoint is that one can film a video and then one can edit the video within PowerPoint. So if one goes to the relevant input file, one chooses a video on my PC, so it's a little bit different if they were online videos, but I've filmed a video and put it onto my computer. Then notice that I'd filmed it in landscape really, and I need it as portrait. One can rotate the video within PowerPoint. Remove this text here. And then, and this is the really nice thing, one can rotate it with the arrow here, but then one can also crop it. So if there is material around the edge that's not really needed, it's possible to chop it off to make the whole thing smaller. So once I've done that, the picture is much smaller. The next thing one can do is one can trim it. So what trimming means, the actual video that I produced was about 1.5 minutes long, but there were a few seconds at the beginning where I was setting myself up, and then there was stuff at the end that I didn't want. I can move these markers here so that I only have the relevant part of the video. And in fact, I did not even show you all of the video that was in this presentation. And if that makes, if you want to, you can then go back and re-edit the length. Notice a long video, some of which you're not even going to use, would make the file rather large. If you are prepared to tick the box discard editing data when you save the file, so when you do save, you've got to use the tools option here, the tools option, then you go into advanced and you find discard editing. So it's possible to import quite a large video which has bits at the beginning and end you don't want, and also has a picture which is too large. You can make the picture smaller, you can get rid of the part of the video that you don't really want, you can save it, and then when you're completely happy that you don't want those bits, you can discard them when you save the PowerPoint file, and that will make the file much smaller. Okay, another thing you might wish to do if you're doing econometrics is to look at some econometrics software. So you might want to switch to some other software. Just be aware, check the software you want is open and ready for use, and check that other software that you don't want is closed, especially if it's got confidential email. And then you can use Alt-Tab to jump to other screens. That's all very well if you're going to record your PowerPoint presentation using a different piece of software. For example, if you're recording it on your VLE, so I might record mine on MediaSite, which is the University of Bristol VLE. But if you are going to do the whole thing in PowerPoint, you can't use Alt-Tab. You need to record some screen material and embed that within PowerPoint. So let me show you another example. I'm going to show you an example of using Stata. Here is an example of a data set used by several textbooks relating the salaries of chief executives to aspects of the company. So I might wish to demonstrate to the students how to estimate a regression of the salary of the chief executive on sales and return on equity. I can estimate that regression, and that produces the regression table for the students. This might be a little bit small, so I might, in preparation, have changed the font size so that things were a little bit larger. Be careful not to make it too large, otherwise it scrolls round. And that would then be possible for me to discuss the coefficients, which I can highlight, or the t-statistics and associated p-values. Then when I wish to finish recording, I move the cursor to the top of the screen and I can... Okay, so that you could tell because I was down here in the corner and I wasn't actually speaking. That was a recording of me speaking over using another piece of software which I had embedded in PowerPoint. And that would enable me to use other pieces of software within the PowerPoint lecture. So how would I do that? Well, again, one goes to the insert, one goes to media, and you go to screen recording, and that allows you to record something which is already on your computer screen other than PowerPoint. And of course, the good thing about that is you can practice doing that to get it how you want it. Okay, so once your PowerPoint presentation is ready, the lecture is ready, then the question is, how do you record it for upload? So various software is available, but the thing I'm really going to talk about is how to record things in PowerPoint itself. But you can upload it to a VLE using another package such as Camtasia, and my institution, as I've said, uses MediaSite. So one goes to slideshow, and then one can start to record. And the first thing one sees when one's recording is a black screen with the first slide. There are some things down here which allowed you to use an eraser and a pen, and it's possible during the presentation to change the colours. And then something which might or might not interest you is that, as throughout this lecture, you can have a little photograph of yourself in the corner. If you don't want that, then it's possible to switch it off. Just be aware, normally when looking at something like Zoom or sometimes on Skype, one sees this little photograph in mirror image, whereas this photograph, it's not a photograph, this picture is not in mirror image. So if one moves to the left on the screen, one moves to the right, which is rather disconcerting. Okay, when one presses the record button, one gets a countdown of 3, 2, 1, and then it starts to record. Incidentally, one of the reasons for having the photograph in the corner is that students often say if there is no picture of the lecturer, then the whole thing feels very impersonal. Okay, one of the disadvantages of having the little photograph in the corner is that typically one will want a few notes so that one doesn't get lost. And here would be my notes. But the trouble is the screen, which is really what I need to be looking at, is in the middle. And combined with the fact that the photograph is not a mirror image, sometimes, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this myself, in this lecture, one is rather shiftily moving one's eyes in the wrong place. So one has to practice consciously to look at the middle of the screen rather than looking at one's notes. Okay, final thing, the PowerPoint recordings are still PowerPoint files. They can be converted into MP4 files, which would be playable on other media, but the MP4 files are much, much larger. As long as your students have access to a presumably legal copy of PowerPoint, the PowerPoint file should be enough. Within MediaSite, which is the lecture capture software used in my institution, I have noticed one's got to be a little bit careful. There is a screen capture option that periodically saves the screen. And this results in a smaller file since it just captures the image. Or there is an actual time recording, which creates bigger files. Because I'm writing on the screen with a pen and talking about it, I have to use option 2. The trouble with option 1 is that I can be writing on the screen and talking, but because the media site only captures the image about every 5 seconds, there might be 5 seconds while I'm writing whereas nothing appears on the screen despite me describing it, and then suddenly a whole load of mathematics appears on the screen in one block. So one needs to be aware of little technical issues like that. Okay, so I've described a variety of ways of getting material into PowerPoint and how to use PowerPoint to produce lectures that you could upload. And I hope that you found that helpful.